most independent and trustworthy journalistic voice in New Zealand sport, I believe, is Jamie Wall, who joins us out of London. Jamie, thanks again, brother. Any surprises for you?
Not really, no. The only real surprise is the makeup of the bench, where Foster's gone for 6 forwards and 2 backs, which we haven't really seen from the All Blacks, I don't think, ever, really. And ever since they've started having 8-man benches. So we asked him about that today. He said it was just a way of rotating his squad and getting the most out of what they've got. He's a little bit concerned about the locking situation. Obviously, Retallick's still out injured, and so they're making the most of Josh Lord, who's not in the World Cup squad, but he's been brought over as cover, so he's been put on the bench there. It was kind of interesting, though, because they had a bit of a choice there at 6 with Shannon Frizzell being out. They've named Luke Jacobson there, which is a good call, and it makes complete sense, but was a little bit of thought that he might have gone with Scott Barrett there at 6 and perhaps bumped Tupou Vai up into a starting spot, which then would have ended up with a 5-3 split on the bench. But we've got basically the team that everyone had presumed. We've got the starting 15 anyway. Just the only real surprise from me is that David Havili's not getting a run on that bench. I would have thought they would have wanted to give him some game time, but other than that, it was pretty easy to tell what this team was going to be.
Roigard on the bench named, so he's the second choice halfback now. Can we assume that?
I feel like we're probably going to need a few more games to really safely assume that. Again, I asked Foster about that today. It was more of like a game time thing for Cam Roigard. Being a reserve halfback in the All Blacks, you don't get a hell of a lot of minutes. And Roigard, I think, only played the one test and came off the bench in that. So, I think that position is still a little bit up in the air. Given Roigard's great form in Super Rugby, I would have thought he would have got a bit more time in a test match environment by now. So perhaps that's the only position that they're really kind of just ironing out, which really, though, considering how much Aaron Smith is going to be playing in these World Cup matches, is not that big a deal, really, when it comes down to it.
As far as the left wing spot goes, Mark Talia has now overtaken Caleb Clark. Can we assume that?
Yeah, I think we could have assumed that a while ago as well. Caleb has played really well in his last appearance for the All Blacks in Melbourne. I thought he came off the bench, did a really good job there, scored a good try, and showed that he's not just an out-and-out winger. But at the same time, I think it's just more of a case of Talia is just too good to ignore. And Jordan on the other wing, I mean, you've got the two most in-form wingers in the country at the moment who are scoring the most tries. So I think that, despite all of the questions around Clark's involvement in the team, it's probably just a safe bet that those guys are in it anyway.
As far as Leonard Brown on the bench, I'm really confused about this guy's role. I mean, as an impact player, he's not going to come on and do anything that creates impact. He just seems to me to be a fill-in plug, and I just kind of wonder why that selection, why they wouldn't have actually tried something different.
Yeah, well, I feel like there's enough cover in the starting backline to be able to deal with any potential injuries or whatever that's going to happen, and that Leonard Brown's more there to just sort of be there as a more straight substitution in the midfield, perhaps. That's the way I'm reading it anyway, because you can move all those guys around. Obviously, you've got Jordan, who can play fullback as well, Bowden, who can play 10, and Geordie Barrett, who can pretty much play anywhere in that back line. So I'm reading that more as Leonard Brown's going to come off the bench for perhaps Rieko Ioane and just take some carries off him, because, again, they've got a big campaign coming up. So that's how I read that selection. But, again, I would have thought they would have gone with David Havili, but obviously not.
Do you think that the All Blacks selection was influenced at all by the Springboks naming such a strong side, or were you always expecting that this is what Ian Foster would do?
No, I was. This was, I think, a game that was projected that the All Blacks were going to play their top strength side, and it's not so much to do with the Springboks. It's about the games coming up. Obviously, we've got this game against France, and then a big sort of dip in quality of opposition before the quarterfinals. So to have your top side only playing one competitive test match over the space of like 2 months isn't the best way to be leading into a knockout World Cup game. So I think that you could have named this team like a month ago, to be honest, and I think it's a really good positive sign for the All Blacks that it actually was so easy to pick, because it means that we've got a really good, reliable team starting 15 there, which we haven't really been able to say about the All Blacks for quite a while now.
In terms of the loose forward trio, Jacobson comes in at 6. Is that a case of just not wanting to rejig the whole loose forward trio? It's just easier swapping a 6 for a 6?
Yeah, I think so. And also just the fact that Jacobson hasn't really played much rugby. I thought he was going to start in that last test in Dunedin. He only came on for, I think, the last 10 minutes of that one. So he needs game time as well. And he's a guy that sort of hasn't really done anything wrong. And I don't think they're losing an awful lot. He's a big, tough ball carrier, which is exactly what Shannon Frizzell's been doing all year. And I think that he's just going to be able to pick up where Shannon Frizzell's left off. So I'm really excited to see how he goes. I think he's been quite unlucky with the way his career has just sort of peaked and troughed quite a bit, rather than establishing sort of a solid place in the All Blacks. So I think it's an interesting selection, but I don't think the All Blacks are losing much by having to make that change.
So what are you expecting then? News Hub, in an article today, have called it a meaningless fixture. You look at the two teams and it looks anything other.
I don't think any test between the All Blacks and Springboks is meaningless, but I will agree that whatever the result of this match is, and then if one of these teams goes on to win the World Cup, it's going to be, I wouldn't say it's going to be forgotten, but it's definitely not going to mean as much as what's coming up. I think a better way to describe it would be less meaningful than what's going to happen over the next couple of months. But being here on the ground in London, and chatting with the local New Zealand community that's here, they're really looking forward to this game. Like, it's quite a cool atmosphere here, because it's a very unique situation that two countries are going to be able to take over Twickenham, and it feels like it's such a big stadium that every single New Zealander who's based in London and the UK is going to be at this game. Brilliant. And probably the same amount of South Africans as well. So it's going to be a really unique atmosphere to have that 50-50 split between the two supporters, and at an awesome stadium in a week when the weather's been absolutely fantastic. I'm really looking forward to being able to go to Twickenham in shorts and a t-shirt.
Finally, Shield Challenge last night. Wellington did the business. It wasn't a great spectacle in terms of a game to watch, and hardly a spectator turned up. I mean, that was the biggest shame about it, Jamie. You got a really meaningful Ranfurly Shield Challenge, a trophy that means something to us oldies, and I know that you still love the history and tradition of it. Barely a person there in the crowd. It's such a shame.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I can tell you that it obviously didn't dominate the airwaves over here in the UK. But at the same time, keeping an eye on it on the live updates that were coming through. I mean, first of all, what was it? The lowest scoring Shield game in like 50-odd years. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, there's that. But yeah, you're right. It says a lot about the state of domestic rugby at the moment that a Shield Challenge between a strong province that's never had the Shield before, who would normally be really G'd up for this, was chucked on a Wednesday night in the middle of their 3-game stretch over a week. That's unfair on Tasman. That's really unfair on them. They should be prioritising Shield games as weekend fixtures, afternoons, so that you can actually get people along and give the challenger enough of a chance to come in and make a go of it, because I think they were playing that game off 3 or 4 days rest, and they've got to go again on Saturday, which really sucks for Tasman. No, don't get me wrong, like I'm happy Wellington won it, and I'm happy that the Shield's still in Wellington, but if that's the way they're going to be defending it, then you might as well just pack it up and go home, really.